So, you've been watching your favourite tarantula YouTubers and think you're ready for your first spider. Well, stick around because this video is for you. Now, when it comes to buying tarantulas, there's a few things you need to try and get to grips with very quickly, quite a few terms. And the first one you might come across is slings, juveniles, subadults and adults when it comes to tarantulas. So, what do we mean by that? That is simply just the life stages of the spider you're going to buy. Now, I would say when you're getting your first tarantula, look for something that's a juvenile. And there's a few very good reasons for that. So the first being, if we look at the slings, a sling is what we call a spiderling. So it's just a baby tarantula that is not long out of the egg. It's only maybe had one molt before it's been sent to you. These are very small and they're not quite as hardy when it comes to environment changes. So if anything goes wrong in their enclosure, and also because it tends to be a smaller enclosure, you can lose the spider. If you've got adequate enclosure set up, if you've got the right size, where it's not got too big a hole that the spider can escape from, for example, then you will be fine. Just like your adult tarantulas, you need to water them and feed them regularly, and they will eventually grow up. But some species can be very slow growing, such as this Brachypelma hormorii I've got here. So this is a little Mexican red knee, and they are renowned for being slow growers, but they are amazing tarantulas for a first pick. What happens when people tend to get slings is they simply get bored. They have this tiny spider that they never see. A lot of them just live in the dirt all the time because that's what they do as babies to avoid predators. They just hide and pick off little springtails and things that might be in the hollows they're in, and they don't really come out. And your spider is going to do that in captivity as well. So a lot of time, yeah, people get bored of spiderlings, and then that means what they'll do is they will then tend to jump on to the next bigger and fancier spider. And quite often they can take a step that's too big for them. But saying that, slings can be a good choice for a first tarantula if you're prepared for that. Now, before we look at the juveniles, let's talk about the adults, the mature tarantulas. There's a few things, if you're looking online, for example, or if you're looking at expos, that you might see written about these tarantulas. You might see SA written down, so that means subadult. Quite often that could be followed by an M or an F to denote if it's a male or a female. So it might be a SAF, that would be a subadult female tarantula. It could also be MM or MF. And that means mature male or mature female. So that's one that has been sexed, we know what sex the tarantula is, and it is in the mature stages. So there's a couple of ways you can tell that for a few of the tarantulas. We might have a video in the future going through how to sex your tarantulas. Things like tibial hooks on tarantulas, for example, but they aren't in all of them, so there's a few other ways we need to look for. This here is Pekin, who is our mature male Tlitocatl albopilosus, which is the curly hair tarantula. It is an amazing first pick for a tarantula, and we will go over that in a wee second because this is one of the ones we're going to recommend. But he doesn't need a lot. With my adult males, my mature males, I like to keep them in a slightly larger enclosure than I would when they're subadults, just because adult males will spend a lot of time, and mature males, sorry, will spend a lot of time roaming around the enclosure while they're looking for females. If we take that size down a bit, we tend to take away some of that stereotypical behaviour. But a brilliant pick for a first spider. The age that I would absolutely recommend is a juvenile. So when you've got a juvenile, for one, it's going to be a lot cheaper than an adult tarantula, but it's not going to be as fragile as a spiderling. And it also means you get to spend a lot of time with your tarantula as it grows. So you get to see some of those other life stages, and you'll get to go through things like doing rehousings. And you'll perhaps get to check the molt of your tarantula to try and find out if it's a boy or a girl, which is an exciting time in any hobbyist's career. But also sometimes it's nice just to have a small spider. It doesn't take up as much space yet, and as well as the tarantula being cheaper, often the enclosures are cheaper as well because they're a little bit smaller. And we will be going over a very cheap enclosure later in the video. So let's say for now, we're going to go through getting a tarantula together, and we're going to look for something that's a juvenile or a sub-adult at most. So we're wanting it in those in-between stages, almost like the teenage years of the tarantula. The next terms you're likely to run into are New World versus Old World tarantulas. The New World tarantulas are simply the ones that come from the Americas. The Old Worlds are the ones that come from Europe, Asia and Africa. So there is a reason for this split when we talk about tarantulas. New World tarantulas developed a defence mechanism called urticating hairs, which are little hairs on their abdomen that they can actually kick off. They're little barbed hairs that deliver toxins whenever they penetrate the skin. So they'll kick them onto the skin of an animal, it'll go in and it'll start to irritate and you can end up with blisters and things. And these are quite cool because they're a mechanism that likely evolved to deal with mammalian predators. Whereas old world tarantulas tend not to have these urticating hairs. So they've developed instead, in this biological arms race, they've developed more potent venom. So a lot of the old worlds tend to have what we call medically significant venom. So this is venom that's a bit nastier. It can lead to things like really strong stomach aches and heart problems and dizziness and nausea and things like that. But that's not to say that all New World tarantulas have urticating hairs, or all Old World tarantulas have a nasty, potent venom, because it's simply not the case. There's always something that breaks the rules in biology. But the two tarantulas I'm mainly going to recommend do both have urticating hairs, and one has particularly nasty urticating hairs. So there's pros and cons to every species when you're talking about them like this. But we are going to stick to New World for our recommendations. New Worlds on the whole tend to be a little bit more docile and a little bit less skittish than some of the Old Worlds, especially the Old World arboreals, which are some of the more advanced spiders you can keep in the hobby. And then the last thing you might run into is some of what we call the ecological niche classification, which is just talking about where the spiders live. So there's three main brackets, and that's going to be fossorial, terrestrial and arboreal. Now, fossorial tarantulas are what we often call just a box of dirt. So these are tarantulas that spend the majority of their life history under the ground. So they tend to build large, intricate tunnel networks that they will live in and only really venture out to get food. Now, those can be amazing tarantulas. They can have some crazy colours and they can be really fun to feed, but you don't tend to see them so much. So I generally wouldn't recommend them as a beginner tarantula. A lot of beginners are looking for an animal that they're going to see that they can perhaps show off. Now the arboreals are the opposite of that. Those are animals that their lifestyle tends to revolve around being off the ground, often up in trees or maybe on rock faces and things like that. So you don't find them down low, you tend to find them up hanging out. And some of those tarantulas are my absolute favourite. They can come in incredible colours, and they can be quite venomous. Some of the most potent of the tarantulas belong to this group that we call the arboreals. And then in between that we have the terrestrials. So these are animals that spend a lot of their lifetime on the ground, looking around. They tend to be burrowers, so they will have some burrows. Some spend a lot of time underground, but they will come up and search around for food quite a lot. Some even have some arboreal tendencies. People talk about there being a category called semi-arboreal, but that's not really something that exists in biology. We tend to talk about that as being scansorial in some cases. The ones that I am going to recommend are both terrestrial spiders, and I think they are a good middle ground. They don't have quite as much specific care requirements as some of the arboreal species, but they're going to be out a lot more than some of your fossorial species that are going to spend a lot of their time burrowed. And we have some very hardy spiders in this group, which is always good for a beginner. Spiders that aren't going to be too impacted if we perhaps miss a feed because we were busy at work one day, or we forget to water them for a week or so. But saying that, we want to strive to never give up on our husbandry like that. So with a few of these terms in mind now, I am going to recommend two spiders. They are both New World tarantulas and they are both terrestrial tarantulas. One is one that I showed earlier in this video, and that is the curly hair tarantula, or Tlitocatl albopilosus. So this is a really good choice. These are fairly inexpensive. You can find them at almost every pet shop, almost every online retailer, and you'll always find them at expos. They're like the pet rock of the tarantula world. They do have urticating hairs, but they tend not to kick them. They're incredibly docile, and although they can move fast, they tend to just wander around slowly, so they're not very daunting as a first spider. This is a mature male, so he won't get much bigger than, actually he won't get any bigger than this. The females don't get much bigger than this. They can have a couple more molts, but this is about the size you might expect from a curly hair tarantula. And again, they are super easy to look after. In here, I've got a little water dish. I've got it, I'm actually going to put in some more substrate, but I've got about half filled with some cocoa coir and topsoil mix, and a little bit of cork round for a hide so that it's started to burrow under. Although now that he's mature and he's looking for a girlfriend, he's spending a lot of time up on top. And I do have a mature female as well that we'll show you. These are amazing for spiders. The only downside is they are very slow growers. And although they're nice and cute and fluffy, it can be quite frustrating at times when you've got maybe a juvenile or a sling and it's just taken a long time to get to that adult size. So for that reason, this is number 2 out of my picks for best pet or best beginner tarantula. My top pick for a beginner tarantula is the Lasiodora parahybana. So that's quite often called the LP or the salmon pink bird eater. These are amazing spiders that get to a big size. So you're going to start perhaps with a small spider, but in no time you're going to have something that will impress anybody that comes around. They're really good eaters, they almost never skip a meal. They look incredible, they've got nice colours as adults, as I said they get big, but they do have quite nasty urticating hairs. So that's one thing to consider. But the good thing with that is that you get used to having to deal with a spider that has these nasty urticating hairs. You learn about how to do rehousings properly wearing gloves and things, and the better ways to move spiders around that might kick these hairs, and that sets you up for keeping other more advanced spiders further down the line. And the best thing about these spiders is they are incredibly quick growers. Within a year, you will have a decent sized spider no matter what life stage you start with. If you get a sling, you will have something that's bigger than most people's adult spiders. So, now that we know what spider we're going to be looking for, we need to get one. There's a few ways you can do that. So my top recommendation would be to find a specialist pet store. One that knows about these spiders and can help you with the whole setup and give you any advice along the way on your journey. I wouldn't recommend going to chain pet stores. So anything like in the States, Petco doesn't have a great reputation. Pets at Home isn't great for spiders in the UK, unfortunately. And that's nothing to do with the people that work there. It's just simply that these are quite niche and specialist animals, and it's not something that they're particularly trained in. So pet stores, if they keep these spiders and they're used to them, they will be able to give you the most up-to-date advice, especially when it comes to things like feeding and rehousing or setting up your first enclosure. After that, I would recommend you get yourself along to one of the expos. In the UK, the invert shows are amazing and you can find them up and down the country. So you might recognise one of my earlier videos, we went to the Scottish show, which was awesome. We picked up quite a few spiders there, but they do them all across Scotland as well. They don't have any in Wales yet, but here's hoping in the future they might have one open up there. The reason the expos are really good is because, for one, you will often get things much cheaper than you'll find in the shops or online. Also, you will be able to have access to expert advice. So there's going to be lots of stalls there filled with all sorts of traders and maybe YouTubers or people that do educational content, and you can ask them about the spider you've got. And quite often you can say to them, look, this is my first spider. Can I get everything I need for this spider right now? And they will set you up with an enclosure. They'll get you the substrate, any plants you need, cork bark, food, everything you could possibly need to get you through that first stage of keeping a spider. If you don't have access to an expo or a pet shop, which is quite often the case in Scotland, then your next bet might be buying a spider online, and it's much less daunting than you think. Often you're not going to be able to buy a spider in the winter months because, quite correctly, the shops just won't ship them to you when it's too cold. The cold can be quite damaging to the spiders. But around, spring, summer, you're going to be able to buy spiders and just have them shipped to your house. You can also buy enclosures online. And the nice thing about shopping online is you can see just a big list of everything there is, and it gives you time to research. You can see what's in stock, and then while you're sitting at the computer you can do some research on whether that is the right spider for you. Quite often at expos you won't always have the luxury of that because there's other people trying to get to the spiders as well, so you have to make quite quick choices. Online shopping, you get to do it at your own speed and you have access to a huge variety of spiders. So let's get our spider ordered.
Right guys, so we've decided we're going to get our spider now. We kind of know what we're looking for. We're looking for a terrestrial New World spider that's going to be fairly docile. If you're looking to buy them online, there is two websites I would suggest if you're in the UK. And the first one is the Spider Shop. So this is one that has a wide variety of spiders at some pretty good prices. So we're going to start by just coming to the homepage. And we're going to go into tarantulas, and it's juveniles we're looking for because these are going to be the best prices on the tarantulas we can get, where they're past that kind of finicky spiderling stage. So if we go onto the page, there's going to be quite a lot of choices here. And the one we're looking for isn't on the website yet, but there is another brilliant beginner tarantula here, and that is Grammostola pulchripes. So if we click on that, one of the good things about the Spider Shop is they give you a lot of description about the animal. So if we read just the first line there, this absolutely beautiful tarantula is an ideal starter species. So we know straight away that if we're looking to get our first tarantula, we're a starter, we're a beginner, this is going to be a good one for us. Tells us a little bit about the size in terms of leg span in centimetres, about the humidity it's supposed to be kept at, the temperature it's supposed to be kept at, and the lifestyle. And it even tells us the origin, which will let us know if it's a new world or an old world. The one other website I'd like to give a shout out to is Spa Spiders. So Luke that runs Spa Spiders is an amazing spider breeder and seller. So if we go into his shop again, we'll have a little look at the juveniles. He's been doing a lot of shows recently, so the website might not be quite as up to date as he would like. So straight away, here's another spider that I would class as a good beginner spider, the Camphiscaria geniculata. Does get quite big, can be quite feisty and a little bit kicky, but not too bad. One of the amazing things about Luke is his spiders are always bigger than you expect them to be, and he always does them for an amazing price. But we are not going to be buying any spiders from any of these websites at the moment. We have already got someone signed up to send us our Lasiodora parahybana, so our salmon pink bird eater, or the LP. So let's go and unbox that now.
So hopefully once that spider is ordered, within a couple of days, a package like this should arrive at your door. Now, unboxing your first tarantula can be quite a daunting process, but if you watch any of the unboxing videos online, there's some really good examples of what you should do when it comes to opening your spider. We are going to prepare ourselves first, so although we have the spider in front of us, we are not going to open it yet. We're going to get everything else we need set out. And with that, we are going to set up a bomb-proof, cheap enclosure for our first spider. And for that, I just took a trip along to B&M and spent a couple of quid to get one of these locking boxes. Now, these are brilliant for spiders, but there is a couple of modifications we need to make first. Spiders don't require a lot of oxygen with the way that they breathe. They can take it in from the air quite easily. So often the gaps around here will be enough for the spider to really get along. What that doesn't help with though is airflow, which is the main reason we want to have a lot of ventilation in our enclosures. So I'm just going to quickly spend some time drilling some ventilation holes into the side of this container. If you want, you can take your time and mark it out all neatly. I've stopped caring so much and just drill it as I go. Quite a lot of people will just take a wood burner and burn the holes into their enclosures, but if you're doing it like this and drilling them, make sure you get all the little bits of plastic out, because the last thing you want is one of those little bits of plastic maybe getting caught up in the leg of a cricket that you put in and your spider trying to ingest it. It'll often just clog up the mouth parts, or it will cause the spider to become impacted where it can't pass any of that waste from it. So it's super important we clean up all that plastic. And with that, we now have a nicely ventilated enclosure where we've got holes at either side, which is going to encourage what we call a cross flow of air. So it's going to go across the top. And what that does is it stops stagnant air building up in there, so we're not going to get as many mould fibres and things, and it helps wick away too much excess moisture, which again just keeps this habitat nice and ideal for that spider. And now that we've got our enclosure, the next step is to get our substrate in there. So there's a couple options you can go with. A lot of the spider mixes that you can buy pre-made are pretty good. The Habitat stuff is brilliant. The Spider Life stuff is pretty good. Repti soil is also a really good mix. So you don't want it to be any of the arid species soil. You want to get like the jungle mixes. I tend to mix my own. So I get one of those cocoa coir bricks that you can submerge in water and it kind of hydrates up into a big bucket of substrate. I then mix that with some topsoil, some sand, some leaf litter and some chopped up sphagnum. And that's what I use for a lot of my rainforest spiders. So we are now going to use one of those mixes I've already got to set up this. And in a pinch, just straight topsoil or straight cocoa coir will work perfectly for most spiders. Now this is a juvenile that we've got, so it's still going to need a couple of inches of soil. So I'm just going to put it in, and then tamp it down a bit. And the next thing I'm going to add is a little water dish. So this is just one of the little gecko dishes that you can get. Pop that in and pop some water in. And there is a few other things to add. So for example, I'm going to add the hide in. So I'll pop that in one of the corners. And that already has a little bit moss on it. And the way I like to do that is to put it down, then take it out and hollow out the area where the impression is to make a little starter burrow for it. And then we're going to add a little bit of greenery, like a bit of pothos, that we're just going to plant into the enclosure. Philodendrons are brilliant plants for this because they're quite hardy and they root very well. So you can just pop in a cut in and it'll start to take off. And then just some lawn moss that I cultivate myself. So the moss is going to do a couple of things. For one, it's just going to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more greenery in there. But it's also going to keep up the humidity and add some nice textures for the spider to start attaching some web to and climbing around. You just have to be careful with the moss around your water dish, because if there's a little bit hanging into that dish, it will just quickly wick all the water out. And there we go. We have set up a super cheap enclosure. The cork bark costs next to nothing. You can get kilos of that off at the spider shop, for example, for like 10 quid. The pothos is just one that I've cut from one of my houseplants. And the lawn moss was stuff that I collected in my garden and then just started propagating it in a separate box myself. Oh, one final touch that I almost forgot about. I am a big fan of using leaf litter in all of my enclosures. There you go, now it looks like a nice forest floor. Now I would highly recommend, and actually say it's super important, to set up your enclosure if you can prior to any of your spiders arriving. For one, that will give it some time for it to settle in, so if there is going to be any changes that happen, maybe any mould that's going to kickstart, you might see it happen before your spider goes into the enclosure. And also it just means when your spider arrives, you don't have to be flying around trying to get things sorted, you already have that enclosure in place. And in fact, quite often I will set up one or two of these. For example, if I go to expos or the invert shows, I might set up one or two of these just in case I bring something back. So I've got a couple set up, and you can just treat them like terrariums. Just give them a little spray every now and then to water them. So next, we're going to move on to unboxing our tarantulas. So before we do that, we want to be prepared with a few pieces of equipment. The first thing we always want to have is some sort of catch cup, something that if the spider does decide to run away or escapes, we can place it over it to catch it. In this one, I've got a couple of holes drilled in the top of here, so we'll chat about why in a wee second. You also want to have a thin piece of plastic or card that you can slide under that catch cup. That way, if it's against a wall or something or on a table, you can press it on to catch it, and then you can just slide that plastic under and pick it up without it escaping. Next, I like to have a bamboo skewer with a little cork stopper glued to the end. So that's good for just kind of urging the tarantula on. But the nice thing as well is that the bamboo skewer fits through the holes in the cup. So if I need to, I can just kind of urge my tarantula out of the cup by just tapping the back leg slightly. I also like to always have at least one pair of tweezers handy. These ones are my favourite because they've got little silicone ends. So that means if the tarantula does decide to bite it, it's not going to damage its fangs. If a tarantula bites down on a hard metal set of tongs, it can break its fangs, which can sometimes be fatal for the spiders then it can't eat. I also like to have a few brushes handy, ones with nice soft bristles. Paint brushes are good for this. Makeup brushes are excellent because they're always really, really soft. And then last, you will need your tarantula and something to open the box with. So let's crack this open and look at our new addition. Now you always want to be careful when you're cutting through the top of the box because you don't know if anything's got moved to the top during transit, just in case. But this is exactly the type of thing you might expect to see. Quite often they'll use packing peanuts. Sometimes it will be little shredded newspapers like this instead. So we've only got one spider in here, and actually it has made its way to the top of the little container. So it's chewed up some of that saturated toilet roll that it was left in, and it's made its way to the top. Still nice and secure in this box though. So we want to be nice and calm when we're taking these spiders out because they've just had quite a journey. We don't want to stress them out too much. Spiders can get stressed. Stress hormones are one of the things that can build up in their system. And the next stage is going to be the unboxing. So we got our spider here and we got our new enclosure here. So what I'm going to do is open up my enclosure so it's ready. And then I'm going to take the spider pot and just place it inside. So I know the spider's going in here. If anything does go wrong, hopefully it's just going to escape into its own enclosure. A lot of people will do this in the bath, so that if the spider does escape, it's not really got anywhere else to run. Another top tip is, if you're doing that, pop some little plant pots or bits of cork bark or something in around the bath as well. And that way it will likely just run and hide under one of those. And this is the size you might expect from a big juvenile LP. So they are one of the bird eater spiders, which tend to be quite big. So even as juveniles, they can be a decent size. Now we do want to be careful because we don't want to get bit by these. Although they don't have any medically significant venom, there is always still the chance they might use that as a defence, and it can quite hurt. You know, worst case you can get quite a nasty infection from it. So what I'm going to try doing is just opening the top and just see if I can get it to come out itself. Now I am going to urge it slightly and we'll see if it does do any of that hair kicking. Did you see that? Did you see that wee kick? So that was it, just kind of try to kick some of those hairs onto this tong as if it was a wild animal, just saying back off. So we're going to let it take its time. If we do need to usher it along, the best way to do that isn't actually with your tongs, it's with your nice soft paintbrush. And we're just going to kind of tickle the back legs. So that hair covering those tarantula's legs are what we call setae, and those hairs can tell what's going on in the environment. They're sensory hairs that feed directly into its neural network. So once it's to the side, I'm going to take this out. Now it is trying to escape. If it does do that, just be nice and calm. And we're just going to use our paintbrush to guide it back in. So this one's been particularly awkward, but you can see if I'm just nice and calm, I can use it to guide it back into the enclosure. There we go. Now what just happened there with the spider going straight into the enclosure is absolutely the most likely outcome. They don't want to be out, they've just been shipped across the country. In America it could be quite a distance, you know, across states. They just want to get somewhere where they feel safe, where they can chill out for a bit. So if your spider does do that, give it at least a week to settle in before you really go looking at it. Just let it get on its shelf where it's going to be nice and comfortable. Leave it to settle in before we think about feeding it or anything. And then before we do anything else, we're going to label the spider, because once you start getting a few, you will forget sometimes what's in the enclosures, especially with the young ones or spiderlings, where they can look almost identical to some other spiders. It can be really hard to identify a young spider or a young tarantula. So I'm just going to pull off this label that is on this box, and what way am I going to set on my shelf? Probably long ways, with a water bowl at the front. So I'll place my sticker there. So now that we've got our tarantula set up in its closure, there's just a few little bits of husbandry we want to go over. So, for temperature, if you keep it roughly in the range of between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius, that's going to be warm enough for any tarantula really to thrive. I tend to heat my room, so the room is just heated to that temperature all the time. If there's any animals I have that need a little bit more heat, I then supplement that heat by other means, by using things like heat mats or heat lamps for some of the reptiles. With spiders, if you are using heat mats, which is quite a popular option, make sure you never pop it underneath. In the wild, spiders will burrow to escape heat. So if you put the heat source underneath, they're going to feel that it's hot and they're going to keep trying to dig down to escape that heat, and they're not going to connect it. It's getting warmer down there. And you will essentially just dry out your spider. It will desiccate, it will dry up and die. What you want to do is pop it to the side or the back. Or ideally, heat the back of the shelves you're on, or even better, like me, heat your room. Once you get a few spiders, it's probably the most cost-effective option as well. So now we're going to get a little chat about feeding, and there is options out there. Ideally, you want to be using cockroaches. Dubias are some of the best nutritionally for your spiders, but they're not always easy to get a hold of. Although in the UK we are starting to see them in more pet stores. What is pretty easy to get a hold of no matter where you are essentially, are these crickets. So 4th instar brown crickets are going to be ideal for most juvenile tarantulas. If it is one of the smaller varieties or the smaller species, then 3rd instar, where it just says 3rd brown, that is going to be the size you probably want to go for. If not, nymph cockroaches are really good options. And although I said this spider's just arrived, so we're going to give it some time to settle in, we are going to attempt to feed it just so you can kind of see the process of that as well. So let's see if we can get some feeding. Now I absolutely hate getting these crickets out of the tub because they drop their legs and they jump everywhere, and pretty much every time I feed crickets I end up losing a few. Got one first time. Now let's see if we can convince our spider to come out. Now you don't need to tongue feed like that. You could simply just drop the cricket in and let the spider get it, but I like to tongue feed every now and then. What that does is it lets me draw the spider out and I get a little bit of a look at it. It's quite cool, but I can check out how my spider's getting on. I can see if there's any issues with it. Now that it's taken the cricket, we'll pop the lid on and give it a little bit of space to eat. And there you go. Honestly, feeding is as simple as that, and you don't even need to tongue feed it. You can just drop the cricket in and then let the spider get it itself. Now, if you do feed it and you're not tongue feeding it where you see it take the cricket, you always want to check the enclosure 24 hours later. And if the food hasn't been taken, take it out of the enclosure. The reason for that is if the spider molts, then the cricket can quite often try and nibble at the spider while it's still soft, and that can cause serious damage to the spider. It can even be fatal. Right, and I think we've got some space on the shelf just behind me here. There we go, another addition. Now you might have noticed me mention moulting there, and that could be a new term to a lot of you guys. So spiders, unlike humans, almost have like their bones on the outside essentially. We do call it an exoskeleton, but it isn't like a true skeleton how we imagine it in most mammals. So they've got this harder cuticle on the outside of their body. And that means when they want to grow, they can't push past that, it's rigid. With us, our skin just stretches as we grow and it grows with us. With these invertebrates, these hard exterior invertebrates, they can't move past that hard exoskeleton. So what they need to do is they essentially need that outside layer of cuticle to die off. And then they start to grow a new layer underneath it. Then they fill it with a fluid in between their joints and stuff, and in between the new exoskeleton and the old exoskeleton. Then eventually at some point they will push their way out of that old exoskeleton. Then they take in a bunch of air and they almost inflate that old body while it's still really soft. Then over a couple of hours, that exoskeleton will start to interact with the oxygen in the air and it will harden up, it will scleroterize. And as it becomes hard, it now is kind of inflated like a balloon. It hardens up, and that is the new size of the spider and the new shape. And then all the internal stuff, everything is kind of shed in the spider, then it all grows to fit its new body. It's a really cool process that we will hopefully go into a little bit more detail in the future about how these mechanisms occur in some of these invertebrates. But a long story short, they squeeze out of their old skin so they can grow new skin and get a little bit bigger. So along with feeding, you will also want to water your spiders. So you'll notice that in the enclosure, I added a water dish. Now that is something I do for all my spiders, except some of my slings, but most of my slings do have water dishes as well. The general rule is, you don't want your water dish to be any bigger than the spread of your spider's legs. So you don't want them to be able to fit all the way in the water dish. That's just going to stop them from drowning if they do happen to get stuck in it. You also don't want to just use straight tap water. So what I do is I use a little bit of Fish Safe, so some of the aquarium dechlorinator, that I mix in with a big kind of like big gallon bucket that I keep, and I fill all of my water dishes from that water. That just means it's nice and safe, it's neutralised any of the chlorine that's in there, and it's also started to interact and take away some of those heavy metals that are floating around in the water. And that makes it nice and safe for the spider to drink. Now, some people will tell you don't need a water dish in your enclosure. That can be quite controversial. I know lots of people that have kept spiders for a long time and never used a water dish and seemingly never had any issues. What they tend to do is just every day or every couple of days, they will squeeze water into the corners of their enclosure for their spiders to drink. Now me, I don't really have enough time to be checking all my spiders every day or two. So I like to have the water dish in there almost as a backup. I will have moss that I tend to try and keep saturated because that increases the humidity in the enclosure, and every now and then if there's droplets on the moss, the spider can drink from it. They can't suck the water out of the moss, so a lot of people put moss in the water dishes. Don't do that, they can't take the water from the moss, but if there's any water droplets on it, they can. The water dish is the easiest, safest option. It doesn't need to be like those little gecko dishes I use, it doesn't need to be the fancy ones that look like rocks you can get from pet stores. It could be as simple as a bottle cap, and that's going to be enough water to keep your spider alive in a pinch. But hydration is super important for these spiders. They don't take in moisture from the air, they drink the water. It's all internal moisture that they use when they're shedding, for example, when they're molting. And with all that in mind, welcome to a new highly addictive hobby and good luck with your first spider. If this was helpful, it'd be awesome if you subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And if you want to see how to rehouse your spider as it gets any bigger, check out any of the videos that are part of this playlist. So I've been Dan, and until next time, cheerio and Rasta.